Welcome everybody to today's webinar, how MSPs can manage ransomware risk to combat soaring cyber insurance premiums. I'm your host, James Slaby, Director of Cyber Protection at Acronis. For those of you who are hoping to see Pat Hurley today, I'm sorry he got called away at the last minute. So I'm stepping in for him as MC today in addition to my other duties this afternoon. We're recording today's event and we will email you a link to the recording afterwards. Your mics will all be muted, but you can submit your questions throughout the event using the Zoom Q&A interface. We have a couple of seasoned Acronis Solutions experts backstage, Stiennon and Steve Nichols. They'll answer some of your questions directly, and they'll hand me a few to ask our panel live towards later on in the event. Let's have a quick look at our agenda. I'm going to start off with an overview of current cybersecurity threat landscape. Our keynote speaker, Richard Stiennon, will take a look at the roots of the current dramatic changes in the cyber insurance landscape. Next, you'll see Acronis' own Topher Tebow taking us through a live ransomware attack in action. That's always a fantastic exercise for our audience. Next, we'll have an expert panel featuring the notorious Dave Sobel and Joseph Brunsman, as well as Richard and myself, discussing how MSPs can manage cyber threat risks more effectively as cyber insurance gets more expensive and harder to obtain. And then we'll take your questions live. At the end, I'll come back with a promo for our MSP partners that I hope you'll stick around for. It's going to be worth your while. And of course, I'll have some resources for your further reading. All right, we have a great lineup of experience and expertise in the MSP business, in cybersecurity, and in cyber insurance. I'll introduce you more fully to Dave, Richard, and Joe in a little bit. But first, I want to provide a quick overview of the key cyber threats that MSPs have to manage on behalf of your clients this year. I'm going to race through this so that we can get to the really smart guys here. All right. So when researchers like Verizon survey small and medium businesses, it turns out that your clients and prospects are really struggling with cybersecurity issues. They can't keep up with patching their known vulnerabilities, which leaves the door open to obvious cyber attacks. They don't have the skills or the budget to implement the kind of security process automation that helps MSPs keep up. They don't really know how to clean up after a breach. They don't collect forensics. They don't dig into the roots of problems to keep it from recurring. And they have no clue about how to integrate their IT operations and their cybersecurity tools so they can get a more holistic view of what's going on. I expect everyone on this call knows how widespread ransomware attacks are. You see the headlines every week. Worth noting that the ones that make the news are generally the very large enterprises. You think of like Colonial Pipeline and the big effects that had, and the fact that they were asked like tens of millions of dollars in ransom. That grabs all the attention. That makes the front page of the general press as well as the tech press. But that kind of overlooks the fact that fully 75% of ransomware attacks are on your clients. They're on the small and medium business sector. A few years ago, if you got attacked with ransomware, you get a crude ransom note like this. Kind of quaint now, given that ransomware gangs have gotten much more sophisticated. I really compare the cybercrime business to any fast-growing multi-billion-dollar SaaS business. They're much more sophisticated and slick in the way they operate. And the fact that cyber insurers didn't really anticipate this kind of growth and sophistication 10 years ago is kind of where we're at, where we are now. On top of the ransomware threat, now we need to worry about supply chain attacks, criminals using popular IT operations and cybersecurity tools to attack businesses. I won't name names here, but as MSPs, you know what a nightmare this is. If you use one of these tools and it's breached in a supply chain attack, you, instead of being a trusted service, IT services provider to your clients, you're actually a conduit for ransomware or data theft malware, a really serious problem. All right, I'm going to take a quick look at some key malware trends. Phishing is still the #1 avenue for successful malware incursions. Fully 94% of successful attacks start with an employee clicking on a link or an attachment in an email that they shouldn't. The bad guys are getting better at evading legacy email systems. Maybe time for a refresh of those. And security awareness training, no matter how much we do it, can't get through to every employee all the time. Meanwhile, the fake emails are getting cleverer, more convincing, looking more trustworthy, and the bad guys are using other messaging services, think IM, social media, SMS, to drop malware as well. So the pandemic forced a lot of us to move to the cloud with our applications data more quickly than maybe we planned. It turns out that that uncovered vulnerabilities in our VPNs, our cloud email, cloud DNS, virtual meeting room tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Bad guys have also gotten much better at using normally beneficent tools for malicious ends. So for instance, once they break into your client's environment with a phishing attack, they'll pick up the client's PowerShell or their Mimikatz or their backup tools to drop ransomware on their systems, steal credentials to escalate privileges, copy data offsite cloud repositories they control. I'll talk about that tactic in a little bit. So that kind of quick, maybe unplanned move to the cloud that the pandemic forced also exposed our relative inexperience in managing cloud apps. So we made it relatively easy for cybercriminals to access our tools, make configuration errors that exposed our APIs, our containers, our cloud data repositories, and our backups. Cybercriminals also keep innovating their pressure tactics to get victims to pay quickly. So it's not just about locking up your data now. They'll steal a bunch of it first before triggering the encryption attack. So now the threat's not just pay us or you'll never see your data again. It's pay us or we'll expose your data online, sell it for profit. That's really bad news for your clients. It's embarrassing to have your emails read, but it also potentially exposes you to regulatory fines if you're under a compliance regimen. If you're a public company, it can hurt your stock price. Maybe your customers and your partners will sue you because you didn't take care of their data. In fact, criminals are taking advantage of this and now calling your customers. If they've stolen data, they'll get a copy of your customer list and their phone numbers, and they say, we've stolen your data from this vendor of yours. So call them and insist we pay it or we'll leak your data too. I mentioned that cyber criminals now operate like very sophisticated large-scale SaaS companies. So they've effectively got an army of distributors whose only job is to get the product onto your machine. In the case, it's not a client that accesses Salesforce, it's ransomware or data theft software. So these low-tech guys who are just really only have a browser and an internet connection is all they really need. So they're crafting phishing emails by the boatload. And when they get a bite, if the client ends up paying the ransom, they get a commission on it, just like regular software distributors do. In the back end, that's where all the skilled development is. And not only these coders coming up with ways to evade traditional cybersecurity defenses, they're also iterating the software hundreds or thousands of times a day. So this kind of industrial scale and the polymorphic nature of the threats explains why our cyber protection operations centers are detecting something like 500,000 new malware instances every day. There's no way for a signature-based antivirus to keep up with that stuff. So the latest wrinkle we've seen in recent months is forgo phishing altogether and just bribe an employee to aid in the attack. So why would you need to bash down the portcullis when you can get an insider to unlock the back door, point you to the safe, give you the combination? Much easier. So this kind of insider attack is becoming much more popular because it's easy and effective. I mentioned about publishing some of your data online as proof that they do indeed have it. And this is very much what they will do, and point you to and say, look, here's a sample of your customer order entry data. So we mean it. We will sell this on the dark web if you don't pay it. So I alluded to software supply chain attacks before. I won't walk you through a blow-by-blow of this is like a typical example of a tech supply chain attack. Short version is that these are like advanced persistent threats of the sort that you only saw like the NSA mounting on our geopolitical adversaries. These nation-state intelligence agencies have unlimited time, patience. They've got a horde of zero-day attacks to draw on, and they're very targeted in their attacks. That kind of sophistication is now being brought by cyber criminals to go after business clients. So think about the efficiency of it. You breach the software repository of a very popular network management and monitoring tool. When those hundreds of thousands of customers download the next rev for bug fixes and feature updates, they get infected with malware. It's incredible leverage. But you think about the sophistication and the stealth of these attacks, the kind of the long horizon, the patience with which they prosecute them. Your clients don't stand a chance against them, and you need to really be sweating them too. We did a whole webinar on the Log4j vulnerability when it came out. Another example of a sort of a supply chain attack. Basically, this took advantage of an undiscovered hole in a very popular, widely used Java logging library that enabled remote execution of just about any code the hackers wanted to, including ransomware and data theft. A very simple process. They just embed a certain string and it opened up the door to them. Now, of course, Java is so popular, the potential targets their number in the hundreds of millions. The patch is simple, but most companies probably have some Java apps lying around that they don't know about, so they're still vulnerable. So this is a good example of how scrupulous ongoing inventory of IT assets is. You can't patch what you don't know is there. Another opportunity to think about. So I'm running a little bit long here, so I'm going to wrap up fast here. I think there's two clear implications to this kind of growing and evolving threat environment. One, it's an opportunity to reduce your clients' risks with cyber protection services. Two, these new threats have made cyber insurance much more expensive. Rebalancing this risk equation between insurance and preventive and recovery measures is exactly what we're going to dig into in the rest of this event. In the meantime, maybe think about adopting some new tactics to respond to these new threats, maybe collect more forensic data, maybe make sure your backups have been scanned for vulnerabilities and malware before you use them to restore, maybe think about refreshing your email security measures. This is not a commercial for Acronis, but if you do want to hear more about how we can help you with that, I'm going to do a poll at the end in which you can raise your hand and we can arrange a consult or a demo or whatever you need. All right, so it's now my great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. Richard Stiennon is the Chief Research Analyst at IT Harvest. He's a longtime industry analyst and advisor to security companies. That's my old job, but I don't have 23,000 followers on LinkedIn. Richard is really a force in our industry. 26 years of experience from pioneering MSSP Netrix, which is now part of IBM, Gartner analyst, and at Fortinet. He's the author of 7 books, publisher of Security Yearbook 2001. He's going to provide us some perspective on how the cyber insurance industry went from selling policies cheap to all comers to the current situation where premiums are soaring and not everyone meets their standards of insurability. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much, James. Much appreciated. And thank you for doing the threat landscape portion, because I've been doing those introductions for over 20 years. It'd be fun to paste them all together and just see how the threat landscape's changed over that time. Let's start with my first slide. I want to take you back in time to when I first got involved in security. I was at the second MSSP in the United States, possibly the world. I haven't figured out if there were others. But Netrix was a security reseller, and they got into the managed security space selling secure internet connections, an actual implementation of clean pipes, because they acted as the ISP as well. And I remember, as we went to Ford and ITT Automotive and, all the big companies here in Southeast Michigan, that there was always that question, like, who's responsible if the security that you're talking up and saying so many great things about actually fails and we get hacked? And the way to address that, to limit the liability for the service provider, in this case Netrix, was to put a clause in the contract that basically said, we're not liable at all. And it had to be that way, right? Netrix probably was $20 million a year revenue business when it finally sold to IBM. And there's no way they could accept any liability for a hack against General Motors or Ford, right? It would wipe them out. So it was, customer beware. You hold the liability for this, though we're going to make best efforts. And that's still in practice, right? Everybody has clauses like that in their service contracts, and you have to. And then fast forward, when I left Netrix, I joined PricewaterhouseCoopers. I actually joined Coopers and Lybrand, but they had already announced that they're merging with Pricewaterhouse. So the big 8 were consolidating down to the big 6 at the time. And by the time I joined, we were merging the security teams at both organizations. And that's when the security team at Coopers learned about an issue that they had at Pricewaterhouse, who had a big engagement basically to do what we used to call pen testing or vulnerability assessment, et cetera, at a very large food manufacturer. And it turns out that basically they're using CyberCop, as people did, or even Internet Security Scanner from ISS. And scanning the internal networks in the plants where they baked a whole bunch of cookies and stuff. And basically the PLCs that controlled the ovens, the conveyor belts, the bakers, all that stuff, could not handle just getting flooded with requests on every single port in a very, very short time frame. So the value there, or the lesson learned, is throttle your scans, and be very, very careful when you're working in production environments, because they shut down the plants and cause probably millions and millions of dollars of losses in lost productivity, and besides that, some risk to people's lives. So Price Waterhouse had that clause in there, but the clause limited their liability to the cost of the engagement. So they only had to give back all the money they charged for the engagement, which was $200,000. And of course, Price Waterhouse was a big company. So that was kind of the early recognition that there's liability associated with insecurity. Next slide, please. So ISS, before they got acquired by IBM, had bought Netrix. So in 1999. So by 2004, they were beefing up and advertising their managed security services. Of course, now they had more SOCs around the country, and failover, to follow the sun kind of operations. And they made a lot of news. It was a very effective press release when they guaranteed that you would not be hacked. And if you did, they would pay as much as $18,000 per network that got hacked that they were managing, and an additional $50,000. Now, if you talk to anybody who was there at the time, boy, did they have escape clauses in their contracts, because it just, that obviously, that's not a lot of money to pay back just the $68,000, a little more. But they definitely never had to pay on that, right? Because you can always point the finger and show it's not your fault that there was a breach, right? Somebody fat fingered something, or it was an insider, things that they weren't controlling for. Remember when the California breach disclosure law passed? For the first time ever, if you're going to calculate risk of financial loss, you have to be able to quantify it. And it's kind of hard to do with cybersecurity. Everybody who sells cybersecurity, especially protective solutions, always is in this strange position of arguing that you invest in our products, our services, and we are going to remove future risk of a major breach. And that's worth a lot of money, so you get a return on your security investment. Complicated pitch to make. And it's, it always doesn't work. A lot of times, and the best pitch is you need this because the law says you need it. That's the compliance requirement. Or better yet, you need this because it'll speed up your operations, make it simpler, and it'll cost less. But the hard one, even though it's the biggest risk, is the risk of a complete breach. So when the California breach disclosure law was passed, all of a sudden you could tag you know how many customer records you have. You invariably had to disclose a breach, even if it was only California customers. You ended up disclosing the breach and notifying all of your customers, because what state attorney general wouldn't go after you if you had just disclosed California's customers? And there's a cost associated with that. Back then it was about $80 per notification, which usually had to go out over mail. And then later on that evolved to not only the FTC started requiring you to not only do the notification, but provide some sort of credit monitoring service after that. So the cost just kept going up. So that's what started the cyber insurance world. And of course, larger companies would get insurance for major breaches, data loss, etc. And we quickly grew into a very profitable segment in the insurance business. There are over 200 brokers. You can go to insurance companies and say, I need cyber insurance, and they'll all come back at you with their packages and proposals. But there's only a handful, probably about 5, that actually underwrite all the risk, right? And they in turn sell the risk in the policies discounted over to a reinsurance company. So we've got a big ecosystem and structure. And these are just a few of the many that you can go to. I remember I was attending a conference in DC, and I got to sit at a table with a bunch of attorneys, and they were all kind of chortling because they were writing the contracts for cyber insurance for the cyber insurance companies. And they all loved the escape clause in the contract that said none of this pertains if there's an act of war, right? So just like your house insurance has that little clause in there about acts of God or force majeure, they included a act of war clause in cyber insurance policies. So if it were an act of war, then, oh, no, we're not going to cover you because there's no way that you could protect yourself against it and that we could cover that liability. Well, when NotPetya hit and spread from Ukraine, where it was initially targeted, and spread pretty much to most of Europe and a few US companies, there's gigantic losses, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. TNT, a division of FedEx, and Maersk, the big container shipping company, all were shut down for up to 10 days. And one of the companies that was hit was Merck. And Merck filed a claim with their insurance providers for $1.4 billion. And insurance providers tried to invoke the act of war clause because they're trying to get the courts to say that the attacks, which have now been attributed to a arm of the Russian intelligence agencies, and that would have been a nice thing to do, except that they didn't. So the courts found in favor of Merck. Insurance companies have to foot the bill for the $1.5 billion. So justice served. Now, mind you, it calls into question who gets to decide what an act of war is, because usually it's the nation states themselves who decide that. But in this case, a court decided it. So sure enough, premiums are on the rise. And I've heard a lot of complaints coming from cyber insurance providers, right? That's something that they used to be their highest profitable insurance policy to write, with profits up to 38%. As soon as they started having to make payouts on those, and as James pointed out, it's primarily ransomware that's driving that, because the ransomware is targeting large organizations that even have the ability to pay. And if the attacker suspects that they have cyber insurance, then for sure they're going to attack that company. So cyber insurance, it draws the flies to the honey as well. And the payouts are quite dramatically high, millions of dollars. So of course they have to raise the insurance premium rates, and trying to maintain that profitability. So they're losing on the profitability, but it's still the most profitable thing in their portfolios. And what is the underlying cause? Well, it's pretty straightforward. That underlying cause is the increase in claims. And this is just the way it works with flood insurance or hurricane insurance, rain insurance. After a huge storm, the insurance companies and that whole ecosystem, including the reinsurers, have to pay out billions and billions of dollars. Now they have to make that up. So they're going to raise their rates, and they do that. Now, calls into question a few things. One of my biggest bugaboos has always been just the very idea of risk management. And of all organizations that have over 100 years of experience with risk management, it should be insurance companies, right? They've got it down literally to a science. For life insurance, for instance, they know your age, your sex, where you grew up. They can lump you together with a million other people and very accurately predict what the risk is of you dying in any year. And that they try and take that level and apply it to cyber insurance, and they fail miserably because they can't measure the risk of a successful cyber attack. Any of us on this call know that that's because you can't measure it or predict it. because it's got active threat actors, right, who have their own ecosystem, as James pointed out, and they are growing their business models, and they have to grow their revenue every year and split it amongst this whole pyramid of people involved. So their rates are going to go up, and their attack targets are going to be broadened and go after larger companies on one side and smaller on the others, ones that they can get the money from. So that's the state that we're in today. It's not a pretty picture because there's not an end in sight. The attacks are going to get worse. The cost of insurance is going to get more, to the point where probably people should be taking the money they would have spent on insurance and implementing some of the many things we all know how to do in order to prevent a cyber attack in the very, very first place. And it also raises a new business opportunity for MSPs in particular, because insurance companies happen to be the best channel for getting incident response business to come into an organization after they've had a cyber attack that caused ransomware, and do the forensic work to find out what happened, clean it up, and prevent it from happening again by providing managed services. So I guess there's good and bad to everything. I'll turn it back to you, James.
Thanks for that, Richard. Great stuff. I just saw an article, and I think it was Foreign Policy magazine, that analyzed that Merck decision. And the author's reasoning is that, or their conclusion is that the court made the right decision for the wrong reasons. I'm not sure I fully understand that, not being a cyber insurance guy, but maybe the panel can, or a Q&A can discuss that in a little bit. So Richard's going to stick around for our panel and for our live Q&A. So attendees, please keep your questions coming through that Zoom Q&A. Next up, I'd like to introduce Acronis' own Topher Tebow, who focuses on community collaboration and threat analysis at Acronis. He's been working with malware and other cyber threats for more than a decade, starting with web-based malware before moving into endpoint protection, which is what he focuses on for us. He's going to take us through an actual live ransomware attack in progress and offer his commentary on it. Take it away, Topher.
Thank you, James. I am so excited to be here. It's always so much fun showing what ransomware does. Obviously, this is what I do for a living. It's something I thoroughly enjoy. But for a lot of people on this call, this is not something that is necessarily a fun experience because they're not doing it on purpose. This is going to be the sort of thing that happens, because an employee clicked the wrong link, downloaded the wrong file from an email, something along those lines. So today I'm going to go over a Conti ransomware attack, as they have been one of the most prolific ransomware groups over the last year or two. And so they're a great example of exactly what a modern ransomware attack looks like. Before I take too much time diving into exactly what's going on here, let's just go ahead and take a look into the system and see what this attack does. Okay, so as you can see here, I've got a number of things going on. We do have a delivery confirmation page, which these are a really common lure for phishers and malware operators. It's really easy, especially during and post-pandemic, when people are getting deliveries all the time. They're expecting random delivery confirmations. So this is a tactic that works well. It's always worked well, and it works better in the last couple of years than ever before. We have some files to be ransomed because, obviously you need that, or, what's the point of ransomware? And then we have Process Monitor over here. Basically, this is here to tell us some of the stuff that's happening in the registry, to see what changes happen there. And then we have Process Explorer that we're using just to see what processes are running on the system as we go through this demonstration. So with this delivery confirmation, obviously there's not a whole lot of detail here. It's just enough to get your information, get your interest, maybe get your information if there's a form to fill out. That's usually how they're going to steal credentials. But in this case, really what they're trying to do is drive you to click this See Details link. Essentially, this is What I've set this up for is that's where the actual malware downloads. But a lot of times you see this, you might expect to be taken to a web page, but you also wouldn't be surprised if you download a PDF or some other document that is your proof of delivery. So when I click on this, okay, we see that it's downloading a file, and no one ever pays attention to that pop-up. We're just going to go ahead and click download file, save file, just like your average user is most likely going to do. So this file has downloaded, and let's go ahead and see what happens when we open it. Now we see a lot of on-track suddenly showing up in Process Monitor, and we also see this on-track delivery confirmation running under Firefox. Oh, now Firefox just suddenly closed, a few other things closed, and things are just kind of going crazy over here in the Process Monitor. So let's just take a moment and see what else happens here. Right now, we do see that our files are still good. Maybe give this a refresh, because sometimes it takes that before you see the changes, but nothing there yet. Let's go ahead and just keep watching for a minute. We do see that the on-track delivery confirmation is still running. Oh, and here we go. The files all just changed. Okay, so they've got this feed C extension and all the icons changed. Let's just go simple with the text file. Just for fun, let's see if we can get this thing to open. So I'm going to delete this extra extension, revert it back to a text document. Okay, the icon changes back. What happens when we try to open this? Well, we can see Notepad, this is gibberish. Clearly this is not what's supposed to be in here. This is actually just some lorem ipsum text is what this should have been. But in this case, the file's been encrypted. We can't read it. So if we let this keep going, there will eventually, or possibly already is, a readme.txt on the desktop. This we can probably open. Notice it doesn't have a strange extension. This is our ransom note. You'll likely see this in any directory where files have been changed, as well as on the system desktop. Now at this point, there are a couple ways to get your files back. Yeah, maybe you can restore from a backup if you have that, but maybe the ransomware operator will actually release your data, sell it online if you don't pay them. So, really the best option, while it's important to have these backups, is really to prevent this attack from occurring in the first place. So the way we do this is with some sort of ransomware protection. Let me switch over to the protected machine that I have here. And as you can see, this is essentially the same setup. We've got, Process Monitor and Process Explorer. We've got our files, and we have the exact same web page. Now, the difference is that this system actually has anti-ransomware protection built in, installed on here. So really, when we run the ransomware this time, it shouldn't really do anything. So exact same process. I'm going to click the See Details link. I'm going to download the file. Okay, just like your average employee. And let's open that file and see what happens this time. Now we see, oh, delivery confirmation. It just closed almost immediately on Process Explorer. I don't see anything really going on, although our anti-ransomware did actually pop up and do a lot of work real quick there. So let's go ahead and pull up the dashboard. So as we pull this up, we see that there is an alert in the console. Basically, we get some basic information here, just telling us, the file that was found to be malicious or suspicious, and kind of some of the actions that it took. In this case, it modified the OneDrive Visual Elements Manifest file, and that has been reverted, as well as all these other files that it changed that quickly, all got reverted using cache, basically because it was found to be changing the binary format of the files, as ransomware will do. So as you can see, these attacks are complex. There's a lot that goes into them. There's a lot that goes into protecting you from them. It's very important to have all of the layers of protection in place and to make sure that you are actively taking steps to protect yourself from a ransomware attack. With that, this concludes my demo, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this back over to James. Thank you, James.
Now it's time for our panel discussion. I'm going to ask Richard to come back to the stage. I'm going to take a seat on the panel myself, probably not talking too much given how much expertise beyond my ken is on here, but I'll be there. First, let me introduce our other star panelists. I imagine everyone in this audience knows today's panel moderator, Dave Sobel. Dave's the host of the Business of Tech podcast. Subscribe to it if you're not already. He also owns MSP Radio. He's a longtime advisor to MSPs and other IT services companies, and of course, owned an MSP himself. So one of the most beloved and influential advisors to the channel that we know. Last but not least is Joseph Brunsman. He's the founder of insurance brokerage Brunsman Advisory Group. He's a former IT professional with a bachelor's in robotics from the U.S. Naval Academy and a master's in cybersecurity law from the Carey School of Law. So pretty pertinent education and expertise for this panel. Joe is working on his 5th book on insurance, this one specifically for MSPs. So put that on your Amazon wish list. Welcome, gentlemen.
Great to be here again.
Thanks for having us, and I'm gonna act as moderator. It's such a flattering way to put it. I'm just a guy with opinions and a microphone. So I'm always
we hope you'll chime in with opinions too, and not just not just be the moderator here, Dave. Don't be shy.
I'll do my best.
And James said you're beloved.
I certainly, if you talk to any of our partners, that's absolutely true.
That's better than being vilified.
I'll take listen to. but let's actually dive in, because I want to. You guys are guys that directly think about this from a risk management perspective, rather than the typical kind of technical approach that most MSP owners are going to come from. So I want to give you the opportunity to give them that initial think on, like, how do we reduce this surface area when you think about reducing cyber risk for them and for their customers. Richard, you want to dive in with kind of the recommendations you give first?
Yeah. So, I always say, look at before you even go down this path of doing a risk calculation so you can decide whether to not do something. Look at the stack of things that you have to do, right? Just what you're asking, right? How do you prevent ransomware? And the stack is well known, because how do companies like Lockheed Martin not suffer from ransomware attacks? They all learned from their past when they suffered breaches and started beefing up their responses. And typically, not everybody's a Lockheed. So you do have to eventually decide to go to a managed service provider to provide that 24/7 coverage that you need, because you can't even hire the people that you need in order to do that around the clock. And this is where the federal government and their executive orders and CISA will just not stop harping on us. You have to use two-factor authentication, any multi-factor authentication for everything. You can't even log into your Gmail account and on a new browser unless you've got at least the SMS messaging feature turned on that they give you for free. And it goes across the board for Office 365. All of your Teams environments have strong two-factor authentication. And I also, when confronted with people say, oh, we've got to stop people from clicking on links. In other words, we want to take away 99% of the usability of the internet and HTML and what built this whole world for us. My answer is no, you're never going to train people out of that, because they're still going to click. And even the best cybersecurity awareness, phishing simulation solutions out there claim a 98%, success rate. 2% get through, and it's easy for somebody to send 100 phishing emails. So 2 of them were going to get through, and they won and you lost. So you do something about it, right? You don't allow those links to open up, or if they have to be opened up, you open them in a sandbox and check it. Or on the endpoint, you look for the activity as Topher just demonstrated for us, to block that from happening. And security is always belt and suspenders, layered defense. You better have backups of your own data. You'll still have the issue if your data was stolen and could be leaked, but at least you'll be in operations while you negotiate with the ransomware providers, and you won't be scrambling around and, getting under the pressure that security teams do. So that's kind of, my general approach.
Gotcha. Joseph, what are you telling to them as the guidance that you give? And then I'll give you guys what I tell them.
Sure. So, I kind of come at this from the risk management side as well. So, I think Richard did a great job talking about some of the technical side. I think on the risk management side, MSPs have a de facto duty of care, right? So unlike other professionals that are licensed by the states where there's a specified duty of care, MSPs can expect that if something arises, so we'll say a claim, a court case that's brought against them, what's really going to be the reality there? Just think about, hey, whoever that IT guy that everybody knows, who's like the snarkiest guy who knows everything, who's like, oh, well, why didn't you just do X, Y, Z? MSPs need to take that caricature and implement that within their own business in the sense of assume that if a claim arises, that's going to be the plaintiff's expert witness. And he's going to sit there and he's going to grill you on every little piece of minutia and every control. And he's going to go through NIST CSF just line by line in excruciating detail and to put everybody to sleep, right? Think of that. And then as business owners, right, we all know, hey, there's always something we could do to improve, right? So I think a lot of it's starting with the MSP just going, okay, I got to take a step back here. The threat environment's getting too high. I need to work on my business now. Here are, like, say, the 3 top things I know I need to do right now within my own organization, right? Whether it's you just haven't gotten around to, say, MFA on your RMM, or you don't have multiple backups, or you don't have appropriate, whatever the other controls would be within your own business. That's where it's kind of got to start. And then, addressing the reduction of cyber risks in totality, I would say, you kind of got to set just minimum standards for your own MSP, right? So I understand new business, you got to take everybody that comes through the door, but there's got to be a point, and it's coming soon, and I'm already seeing it at the larger MSPs where they're firing clients, right? They're saying, hey, if you don't get on board with this, we're not the place for you, right? So it should be somebody else's problem. And I think that would go a real long way to, 1, being the shot across the bow, but 2, really starting to insulate that business from some of these customers that they're going to look at your insurance policy as a piggy bank, right? And you just don't want those types of clients.
Right. And I'll tell you, I make 2 recommendations when I ask them this. The first I actually say is assume you will be breached. Most of the conversations always start with the well, here's all the protections, here's all the things we're going to do. And I'm going to say, no. Assume you're going to do all those things because, of course, you do them. But you also must assume you will be breached. It is a matter of time. And know what your stance is for how that's going to happen, how you are prepared to do that. Because the second part is know what your response is to will you pay the ransom or not. You need to know that up front. And I will just speak for myself in my business. I, under no circumstances, will ever pay a ransom. Period. I will endure the downtime rather than give the criminals money, because I know giving the criminals money brings more ransomware. And I will not perpetuate that. I will absorb the downtime. Now, that means I've taken a certain amount of risk in my own business, and I must be prepared for that, because my first statement was, you will be breached. and so I have to be prepared for that event. Now, what that means from an insurance perspective, what that means from a business continuity perspective, what it means from I must have some cash on hand to endure that. You've got to have an answer to that. Will I pay the ransom? Before you're sitting under the gun having to make that decision. Now, as we think about the rising cost of this, and just I'm going to throw this one to you first, how do MSPs work with their insurance providers to address this cost increasing? It's getting explosive so fast. Is it tweaking the policies? Is it rewriting the policies? Can you even get policies? How do you deal with the cost problem now?
The cost problem, that's a difficult problem, right? And I'm sure Richard, he'll chime on this one as well. Really, a year ago, I could ask for everything in the kitchen sink. I could ask for any sort of a mandatory endorsement. I could delete all types of exclusions. I mean, it was the Wild West, and I was having just a great time. And those days have ended. So while there are a litany of things that on a standard policy that I would want to change or fix or endorse or whatever, those days are pretty much gone. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but part of what MSPs need to brace for is, one, your insurance is going to get more expensive. Two, if it's more expensive, be happy because you got it, right? There's plenty of insurance companies now just bailing on the market in their entirety. When it comes to those risk mitigation efforts that would lower the cost of insurance, yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that an MSP can do. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to have a big impact on the front end. So what I'm focusing on now is, hey, for MSPs, and I have a 40-minute video on my YouTube channel, people just search for my name, with all of these risk reduction, risk mitigation measures, right? So it's more about thinking, we always talk about cybersecurity defense in depth. This is all about defense in depth on the business side, right? Like how do you proactively try to, one, limit the possibility that policy will ever be used? And two, if that policy does get triggered, what's the name of the game there? It is risk management, right? So you got to think, how do I limit the damage at that point, right? So then it's, do you have these appropriate steps in place, whether it's exculpatory agreements, whether it's something simple like in your newsletter, did you contractually require your clients to carry cyber insurance, right? To take out a lot of those big ticket items. That in the near term right now, that's really the name of the game, right? So your insurance is going to go up, but now you have to play the game of, how do I limit any potential damage there? Because I will just say, if you're an MSP and you have an insurance claim, you're in for a rough renewal, / you might just be self-insuring that, which is, and I do my damnedest to try and help every MSP that comes through the door. But there are just some MSPs that are no longer insurable. Like they won't take explanations. They won't take a look. It's, hey, you got hit with a claim. I see there's a $250,000 loss. I'll pass. And it's unfortunate, but that's where we're at.
Yeah. Richard, what are you telling, what are you telling there to address the cost problem?
Well, like you, Dave, I am a believer in self-insurance, but I think only from a perspective of the thought experiment required to get there. I know when I go to Home Depot and they offer me insurance on the tools that I rent for half a day. The most ridiculous was I rented a tall aluminum ladder, and it was going to cost me $12 for half a day. And then they wanted to charge me $8 insurance. Of course, the only possibility is the ladder falls off my truck on the 3-block drive back to my home and somebody drives over it and I have to buy a new ladder. I self-insured. No way was I paying $8 for that. So do the same thing in your MSP business, is step back and go, okay, insurance is expensive, it's onerous. We're going to cover our own costs in case of a breach of one of our customers, and or something that can go outside the contracts that we have with the customers. Figure out what that cost is, and if you've got lots of money, of course, set that aside, or know that you have to come up with that quickly. But then start looking at how you can reduce the possibility of any of those things happening and what you can do with your customers. And one great way that Joe alluded to was make sure your customers are covered with cyber insurance. So the first claim goes to the cyber insurance company. If it were, it'd be a beautiful world where you could require all of your customers to have cyber insurance. I know I've worked at companies that were required to have cyber insurance, so they have $10 million contracts. It's super expensive. It's kind of painful to be paying tens of thousands of dollars a quarter for insurance. But use that concept. In other words, do the same exercise that an insurance provider does to decide if you're worthy of being covered for that risk.
I would think that it would be easy to get customers on board with this, right? Because it seems like it's really obvious, and it seems like there's real damage, and so it would be obvious to you want to do all this stuff. But that isn't necessarily what we're seeing. Are there techniques that you guys have seen that MSPs can use to get their clients more on board with this, other than just sort of begging? Like what's the method that gets them to do it?
I've seen MSPs that sell cyber insurance. So they manage the insurance policy. They become a broker. And that would be a win-win for everybody, right? They get a piece of the action and get all their customers on board.
So what I tell all of my MSPs is kind of have this conversation, right? They could play it however they want. But what I tell them is, here's what I would say if I were you, and I've only had positive feedback from this. So if you sit down with your client, you go, hey, right, here's our MSA, right? And they go, well, why do I have to have cyber insurance? Isn't that what you're for? Right? The conversation I recommend is, okay, we have our own insurance policy in the highly unlikely event that we make an honest mistake, right? We pay good money for that to try and make you whole again because we want to be responsible business partners. However, it's actually in your best interest, Mr. Client, that all of our other clients have cyber insurance, and here's why. Let's say a company is a client of ours and you don't even know they exist. They wire, let's say, $10 million to a bad guy, okay? That other business owner is now sitting there going, maybe I'm a third generation business owner, I'm gonna have to shut this down, I've got people relying on me, so forth and so on. He goes to his attorney, and his attorney says, we're gonna do the shotgun approach. We're gonna sue everybody, right? What does that do to our policy? It lowers the amount of insurance we have, even if we did nothing wrong. So now let's say later on in that same year, something honestly happens to your business and we want to make you whole again. Our ability to make you whole again is severely impaired or completely gone, right? So it's not in our best interest that you have cyber insurance. It's actually in your best interest that all of our other clients have cyber insurance as well, right? And then there's some practical applications. It's way faster than lawsuits. We don't have to get attorneys involved. But generally, that kind of step one conversation I just recommended has been very successful.
Joe, is it possible for an MSP to discount, their costs if you're covered for cyber insurance?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean,
so make it a positive thing.
Yeah, I mean,
the alternate perspective I've seen on that, our friend Derek Simpson, another lion of the channel advice, is that this is part of a continuum of issues that suggests that if you can't get your client on board with upgrading their cybersecurity stack, for instance, with new services from you, the MSP, and if they are unwilling to buy cyber insurance, then you have to be willing to walk away from them because they present the potential to kind of suck all your resources, both financial and the time that your teams are going to spend cleaning up from their mistakes.
Gotcha. Yeah, and go ahead, Dave.
Oh, no, because I wanted to be mindful of time, because Richard, you brought something up during your presentation that I wanted to follow up on, because I want to be also very timely. You brought up acts of war as it relates to cyber insurance policies. Now, I'm a news guy, so I cover things in real time. There's a war going on. And by the way, there's a lot of cyber activity going on right now, particularly between Russia and Ukraine. Are you anticipating that clause may start kicking in for Russian or Ukrainian actors working in the United States during an actual time of war?
Absolutely. During the similar types of attacks against the country of Georgia, a woman who ran an ISP in Atlanta, Georgia, happened to be visiting home in Tbilisi, and she said, "Oh, hey, these denial of service attacks, I can handle those. We got lots of bandwidth in our ISP. Just move your hosting to us," which they did overnight. And all of a sudden, all of the denial of service attacks took out her entire ISP, shutting down access for all of her hundreds and hundreds of customers. Back then, people wouldn't have thought of cyber insurance claims, but that's very real possibility that it could spill over and you would be collateral damage of an act of war.
So Joseph, the obvious question there is okay, as the guy selling insurance policies, break that down for what that means for an MSP to be filing something during a time of war. What's the landscape look like?
Yeah.
Yes.
They
So
have to worry about it.
yeah, it's definitely a concern. So I think that when we look at, say, like Mondelez v. Zurich, Merck v. I believe it was Ace American, that if I take off my insurance hat and I kind of put on my legal hat here for a second, I think the reporting on that was a little bit overblown because, one, that's a different level of insurance, right? So anytime a claim arises of that magnitude with policies that big, there's always litigation, right? No matter what. So, we also have to assume that the policies they're carrying are substantially different, materially different than what the average business would get, right? Even a large business, they're not carrying, $1 billion cyber policy. So, and that's just kind of the name of the game, how it works up there. But, there should be potential, right? So you have to check. I actually made a video about the war with Ukraine here and some of the impact that could have, specifically on the policy side as well as the hardware side, trying to get all that. But, I think you should be taking a look at that policy, right? Asking your broker, is there an exclusion for this, right? So a lot of carriers came out after that because so many businesses freaked out and new endorsements got put on that essentially said, hey, we're not covering acts of war, but to clarify, if it's cyber terrorism, right, or some sort of cyber act of war that you get caught up in, right, there's a card back there that could provide coverage. Obviously, I can't speak about every policy and every endorsement that got added on there, but it's worth just taking a look. But then once again, what's the name of the game that Richard and I have been talking about? It's, hey, try to do what you can to prevent the use of that to begin with, right? And a lot of it, I think, is really dealing with those proactive measures.
Right.
Yeah, putting in the vendor perspective here, I view this as another opportunity for our partners to look at disaster recovery services, whether it's cloud-based or you go in with, say, our integration partner Scale Computing and their NUC-based, premises-based disaster recovery appliance. You've got one more tool in your kit bag for saying, look, don't rely on insurance. Give your clients the option to recover from a threat with DR.
Right. So I'm going to ask for a quick lightning question answer is if I give each of you guys one quick thing to say besides tech, what's a people or process recommendation that you'd make in 20 seconds that somebody should think about first?
Focus on incident response planning. And
okay.
I wish I'd said that first. Dang it.
Sorry, I had to get my elbow in.
Yeah, yep. I'm totally with James on that. Is go through an incident response exercise so you know who to call, because it's going to be late at night or a holiday weekend and you won't know who to call.
Joseph, what's yours?
Oh man, I would say it's a free video I put out. It's called Get Smart. It's 40 minutes long, something like that. Like,
You're cheating.
That.
I like it.
Yeah, it's tried and true. It's stuff that your peers in other industries have been doing for 30 years. So it's not like I'm smart enough to come up with this. It's, hey, these are the things I've seen work in real time with actual lawsuits against my actual clients. So take a look at that video. That will go a very long way.
Well, we are coming up on the top of the hour, and I want to be careful on time. So, James, I'm going to throw it over to you to take us through some of the questions from the audience here.
Thank you so much. The great stuff, panel. We do have some excellent questions from the audience here. Let's see. When taking all the precautionary measures you have mentioned and then some, how do you bring these precautionary measures and then some to their attention? I assume that means the client's attention. I'm wondering if this is a question about marketing or sales or just communication with the client or the prospect about what you're doing.
You have to, the legal terms are one thing, but you also have to have that conversation so they understand what they're signing, because it's so often in our own personal lives and often our business lives, we just go, yeah, NDA, agree not to compete, employment contract. Yeah. So talk it through so they understand in non-legalistic terms what you're trying to accomplish.
I'll offer mine real quick, and it is this should be part of your regular scheduled briefings with your customers. You should be, when I think holistically about the conversations you want to have with your customer about their business objectives, how your investments are driving business outcomes, their security risk profile, both what's exposed and what isn't, need to be part of that conversation and tied to the business piece about either protecting revenue or as I always say, couching security as a competitive threat. That it is one more competitor that is trying to steal profit, and what are we doing to mitigate that theft of profit in the same way the store down the street we're trying to compete against them. So I would include it that way.
All right, our audience member has clarified the question and said, how do you bring the measures you've taken as an MSP to the attention of your insurer? What's the best way to communicate that?
Oh, well, that pops out on the application. The $1 trillion question here is, can the insurance company actuarially quantify what that means to their bottom line, right? Like that's really the question, right? So for example, to give you a kind of a crude example, we all know that companies should be doing security awareness training, right? Does that make you X% safer than the company that doesn't do that, right? That's what they're still really trying to figure out right now. But obviously, anytime you can put your best foot forward, that's naturally going to assist you. But you're kind of just in for the ride at this point. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but as my son just said when he came home from preschool today, he's like, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. I mean, it's kind of just where the market is currently at. So hopefully, you can obviously, increase deductibles and stuff like that. There's some other stuff you could do to be fair, but hopefully 5 years from now, the market has relaxed, right? And we have a better handle on what these specific controls actually do, like how much safer is an MSP that contractually requires cyber insurance compared to one that doesn't, right? Like what does that risk profile look like? But the MSP community at large, to give you guys some credit, I mean, you kind of just got chucked into this, right? So it was coronavirus, work from home, rise in ransomware. If you go back 4 or 5 years and you try and look at the case law to see MSPs getting sued, there's just not a lot there, to be honest. I mean, there's just not a lot of court cases. And then suddenly it was like, boom, here you go. And all of a sudden it's things that maybe someone's been an MSP for 20 years. And now suddenly I'm talking to them about the managed control operate exclusion. And they're like, what are you talking about? Right. And there's just so much that has to just kind of happen all at once. It's a very difficult problem.
So one question I'd ask is, let's say our partners download this ebook I wrote about assessing and mitigating your own supply chain risk. We say, run this checklist, use this framework to assess your own security, people, process, technology, and then you can show this to your clients to prove to them, look, we've really done a lot of things to reduce our risk of mitigating a supply chain attack and becoming a conduit for malware to you. Will their cyber insurer look at that same output and take that into consideration?
I would hope so, but I'm not as confident that cyber insurer, it's not that they're not smart, it's that they just don't have the data sets yet to really validate that stuff. So even like a lot of questions you'll see on an application, really from most of the major companies right now, some of what they're asking, they're just trying to figure out if something works or not, right? Like if you talk to the underwriters, it has no bearing on the price of the policy. They're just trying to figure out, they're like, does this stuff work or not? But I would always couch that with, anytime you can be more secure, right? That's a good investment to look into, right? So just because an insurance company on the front end doesn't save you money, it doesn't mean that, hey, they're going to ask for it at the next renewal, or if a claim pops off. Right now, we have to legitimize your security posture more in depth to a different insurance company. That's not going to be a crucial part. So anytime you can show that you're a responsible, developed organization that's taking threats seriously, it's always going to help you.
And less can be more, because you don't necessarily think throwing more tools at the problem solves the problem, because that actually can increase the complexity in the attack surface. So a principle of less is more can actually be very helpful here, because you can actually say, like, we have taken steps to have a smaller attack surface. It's something that you can work toward.
All right, I've got, we're running a little long here, but we've got a couple of good questions I'd still like to get to if you guys can stick around. This is a broad one, and let's try to answer this as best we can. What coverage do you recommend? I assume that's like a how much question. Why are we getting insurance? How are we liable for the client getting infected? Or is this just about coverage to appear in deposition? So is cyber insurance just a fig leaf against lawsuits? How much should they really be buying? Why are they getting it?
So one, I have a video on my channel. It's called the Plain Language Insurance Breakdown for fellow business owners, where it goes through all the different common types of insurance. Specifically for an MSP, I would say a tech E&O policy is kind of the broad umbrella term here. So
yep.
70,000 foot view, one side of that policy is E&O. Somebody wants money from you. The other side of that is what we would consider like cyber insurance. Something happens to your network. As for how much you should get, that's a tricky question that really just depends on the MSP, but I would say get $1 million. One of the things that you want to think about is on the E&O world, you don't want too little insurance because that limits your options of defense. You look irresponsible to the court and to the jurors. You don't want too much insurance because your limits are actually generally discoverable by the plaintiff via subpoena, right? So if you have too much insurance, that plaintiff's attorney is going to be sitting there going, I'm buying a new boat, right? And I can promise you they're saying that because I went to law school with those guys. But then on the other hand, you have to consider, hey, maybe you could have 2 events in a year. You could have an E&O claim pop in, and then you could also have a cyber event internally that could impact your business, right? So it's a very nuanced, very individualized answer. Unfortunately, I can't answer it for everybody here, but it's really like a conversation you have to have with a broker who actually understands what you're doing, who knows the industry, who knows the policy. As opposed to the uses of it, I will just say I would not, to my worst enemy, want them to go through any type of court case, right? Dealing with an E&O claim, much less doing that on your own dollar. You don't have the experience. You don't have the time. It's just a soul crushing, awful experience. And so I would say, unfortunately, are you going to have to pony up for the increasing cost of tech E&O for an MSP? Yes, but it's absolutely worth it. And to put it in perspective, you're a small MSP and you're like, dude, I got to spend $2,000 this year on this policy. Like, this is insane. Well, if you have a court case, that $2,000, that's like the down payment to talk with an attorney, right? So then you got to think maybe you could lose in court, and you just got to keep in mind, when I'm at a barbecue and people ask me what I do, if I don't want to talk to them, I say, oh, I'm in insurance, right? And they just immediately run away.
It works with cybersecurity too.
Yeah. So for cybersecurity, think about it this way. You're an MSP, you're going to lose. Why? Right? It's all about mitigation of losses as opposed to win-lose. And the reason why is because what you guys do, and I'm a former IT, right? What you do is so technical, there's zero shot you're going to explain anything technical to a jury. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? So having an attorney who specializes in this, who's done this before, who can guide you through the process. There's a whole bunch of other particular reasons, but I'll get off my soapbox here. I'm done.
All right, I got to. Go ahead.
Just keep in mind, I saw the average cost of insurance for a small business, cyber insurance, is $1,700 for $100,000 worth of coverage. So if you need that $1 million, you're looking at $17,000 a year.
All right, I've got one more question here. I know we've gone a little over, but this is another good one. And I believe it relates to the Log4j vulnerability. The cyber insurance I've seen does not cover infections unless all the upgrades, I assume patches here, are done to the network. But the Microsoft breach was not stoppable unless they turned off their on-prem servers. The December 6th patches fixed the issue, but until then it could not be stopped. Even disabled accounts could send email. No matter what the client did, they got infected. Would insurance companies really pay off, or would they just blame the client's routers, multi-factor authentication, etc.?
So from what I've seen, and this is actually in my latest video talking about the war in Ukraine, this is where, unfortunately, right, my industry does not attract a lot of Rhodes Scholars, right? Like there's not a lot of, I mean, just to be fair, right? There's not a lot of super smart people working at the broker level. And so some of the exclusions we're seeing now, it's really a double-edged sword for MSPs. So an example of that would be, I haven't seen the exact exclusion he's referring to, but some of the exclusions I have seen that come across my desk that my clients, they would never even see that. Something to the effect of no coverage for legacy hardware or software systems, right? So if a breach comes through legacy hardware or software, there's going to be no coverage for that. Now, obviously a double-edged sword for MSPs, because now your client could come to you and they're like, well, this is the quote we got, and it turns out we have to now upgrade all this hardware and software you've been referring to. So that's a bonus for the MSP. Downside, it's probably going to take forever to get that stuff. But then, you know, for the client, they're like, now they have this huge exposure they're sitting on. And for the MSP, you know, if that client gets their claim denied, they could be trying to turn around and bring that claim against the MSP as well. So it's a double-edged sword. It's policies are only getting more complex and more nuanced, and the case law is really starting to evolve and develop out there. So we can kind of start filling in some of these big black holes of coverage analysis. But, you know, in total, I would just say, just do everything you can reasonably, right? Make sure you're always offering a higher level of service. Talk to your clients.
Keep an eye on your technical debt, right? So in this day and age, if you are running on-prem Exchange server, which is the thing that was so widely exploited, then, you know, just look around you. Why is everybody else moving off Exchange? Why is Microsoft trying to get you to move off of Exchange? Why aren't they supporting it anymore with updates? It's because it's end of life, and you have to move on with the rest of the world. And it's, you know, the new solution, Microsoft, you know, Exchange and Azure, Office 365 is much more secure, and Microsoft will move very fast to fix anything that happens there.
And you know, really the name of the game for MSPs moving forward is, if I go to an architect and I say, hey, I want you to design this building, and it comes back and I go, you know, it's a little too expensive. I know you built in a 30% safety stress margin. I only want that to be 10%. That architect's going to tell you to pound sand. He's not going to do business with you, right? He's going to bill you for his time and he is out. They're not going to stamp those plans. They're done. And I think MSPs need to start getting into that mindset of, there's got to be the minimum security level. Always offer a higher level of security, but there's got to be that baseline minimum where you're like, hey, anything under this point, we are not your Huckleberry, right? You got to go somewhere else.
Another service offering. You'll go in and you'll tell them how to get to that baseline, and you know, help them probably, because you can sell them services and products to do that. So you're definitely helping your clients and reducing everybody's liability.
Well, and don't lose, I mean, because and Richard just made the point, don't lose sight of that the true value of the MSP is the knowledge and the expertise on how it's customized and implemented, not the actual turning of the wrench. It's the making the choices that are right for that customer. That's the real value. Don't lose sight of that, focusing on the turning of the wrench.
All right, gents, closing thoughts before we wrap up and I go to a few closing comments. One more takeaway for our audience.
Do a net present value of your cyber insurance policy costs and look at that and see what the return on investment would be if you improved your security.
Well, I'll throw out mine. Is the easy thing is, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it and it wouldn't make money. So these are hard problems for a reason. That's not necessarily all bad. These are hard problems. That's why your expertise is valuable. that should come at a premium. And by the way, you need to protect yourself because of the premium nature of that and make sure you're good at these things. Remember, it was easy. Everyone would just do it.
And I would probably end by saying, I know insurance is going up. I do the best I can, for my own MSP clients. But maybe the upside of all of this is the industry's maturing. There's going to be barriers to entry, right? So that whole idea of there's always someone cheaper, that's probably going to start going away, because just to get into the industry, it's just going to become too complex, too costly. The upfront costs are going to be too much. So for the established MSPs out there, I think maybe that's, an opportunity for them. And I would say that, you have to start thinking not just like a technician. Obviously, that's the fun part, but you have to start thinking like a business person as well, right? And don't be afraid to do that, because I'll tell you, my clients that aren't MSPs, they're falling over themselves trying to find anybody that can understand technology in-house. They're going to have to go to an MSP anyways. So know your worth, just like Dave said, set those standards, hold hard to them. And if you just don't think someone's the right fit for you, I promise you somebody else is going to come in anyways, right? Because they're going to have to. Ultimately, like, it's a bell curve IQ problem, right? Like, there's just not enough smart people to do all the things we need in cybersecurity and systems administration. So they're going to have to go to an MSP anyways. So keep your business name intact. You worked really hard to do it. Don't let some guy talk you out of, he doesn't want to spend an extra $20 a month and now he's going to get hit, right? And put you through hell. So stay safe out there.
Nice summary, guys. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions. Before I get to talk about our partner promo, I want to thank Richard Stiennon, Dave Sobel, Joseph Brunsman, and Topher Tebow for their expertise and insight today. While that's running, let me tell you about that promo I mentioned. We're basically making it very easy for our MSP partners to move their clients to Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud. We'll basically pay the balance of your client's existing contracts with their current platform provider. We'll also give you a ton of support and tools to make that migration to Acronis smooth and simple. All right. I want to highlight just a few of the hundreds of white papers, ebooks, and analyst research available in the Acronis Resource Center. I got links to a few of them here. There's the recent cyber threat report, which pinpoints the security issues that your clients are worried about. That MSP Speak report is surveys your peers on their issues and their plans for cybersecurity services. That checklist is a good basis of discussion with your clients about the kind of cyber protection services they should be thinking about. And if you don't know us at all, take a look at that data sheet and get understand some of the basic features of our platform for our MSP partners. We always encourage our partners to take advantage of the Acronis CyberFit Academy's training and certifications for your sales and technical people. Our data shows that our partners that do get that training, do get the certifications, generate twice as much revenue from Acronis services. I think for pretty obvious reasons. You just sell better, you support more effectively. Finally, please support the Acronis Cyber Foundation if you can. It's our nonprofit that builds schools and provides technical training to kids in developing countries around the world. Your money really goes far there. So if you got the means and the inclination, please support it. With that, I'll say thanks everybody for coming. We hope to see you at a future Acronis event very soon. In the meantime, be safe, be secure, be well. We'll see you all again soon.